now. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Heather Allison, president of ERA Minnesota. With me today is Haley Dickinson, our vice president. And we're really excited that you're able to join us for our Lobby Day workshop. So this is a quick agenda of the day. We're going to do a brief discussion about the organization, talk about the bills, and then Haley's going to go through how to set up a meeting with your legislator, some lobbying 101, and then we'll have question and answers kind of throughout. And like I said, if you think of something you want to say, feel free to do shout outs in the chat, put any questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to cover those during the question and answer segments. So again, I'm Heather, really excited to see you. Normally, traditionally every year we would be hosting a rally day at the Capitol that would include our lobbying portion. This year, because everything's virtual, Haley actually had the great idea of saying, hey, why don't we extend this across multiple days? And so we went with it, and it's actually been amazingly positive feedback. We've had so many folks come on to our workshops, and I think it's been even better than our traditional lobby day. So ERA Minnesota, we are a fully volunteer-run nonprofit. None of us get paid to do the work we do. Every penny that's donated to the organization goes into the work we do. We try our best to do education and outreach around the Equal Rights Amendment, where it is here in Minnesota and where it is not, same nationally. And we are a coalition of individuals as well as partner and ally organizations here in Minnesota and around the country. We are just purely dedicated to getting the Equal Rights Amendment into our Minnesota state constitution and finalized nationally so it's in our US Constitution. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And again, this year is a little different. We have to be virtual, so we had to be creative, but it's actually been a really exciting opportunity to try something new. Let me just let some folks in real quick, bear with me. Oh. All right. So what's happening right now and why do we really need to do lobby workshops and why do we need to lobby our legislators is we have committee deadlines coming up the middle of this month. So this particular year, if we want any of the ERA bills to be heard on the Senate floor or the House floor and voted on, they need to be passed out of committee by certain dates. So the first date for the first body to pass it out of committee is the 12th of March, and the second body has to pass it out by the 19th. And that's coming up real soon. And that doesn't mean that the bills die. These are new bill numbers this year. They have to be redone every 2 years. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So these are new bill numbers. So even if they don't get through the House and the Senate this year, they will still be the same bill numbers for next year. But it means we lose a lot of headway and a lot of time. So we love to get it as far as we can this year. So we really need to try to meet those committee deadlines because, as we say, equality is under attack in so many ways, continually. It hasn't gotten better. It just seems to keep getting worse, especially now with COVID highlighting the disparities of the pandemic's impact on women, especially women of color in our communities and Indigenous women. So you want to go ahead and go to the next slide here. So these are the bills. We had an amazing show of support in our Minnesota Senate for the ERA. This is the first year we have had so many senators decide that they wanted to take this on themselves. And they wanted to try to get as many senators on ERA bills that they could. So what that means is you can only have 5 authors, an author and co-authors on a Senate bill. In the House, you can have tons, but the Senate is more limited. So what they did is they did a lot of clone bills. So you'll see if you go in and look it up, there are a bunch of bills that look like they're all just duplicates of the ERA. But really there's 3 bills that we're focusing on. And then there are what we call clone bills of each of those. And again, a clone bill is the same bill, the exact same language, just the ability to get a new key author and co-author. So it gets more support and that show of support from legislators. So the main 3 bills are, we have Sandy Pappas's bill, Senator Pappas, who put in basically it's a mirror of the national language. It's the equality under the law shall not be abridged or denied on account of sex. So this is for the Minnesota State Constitution. And in the House, in the Minnesota House, Cowley Herr, Representative Herr, has done the companion bill to Senator Pappas's. Then we have Scott Dibble. We have Kristen Bonner and Mary Knesh. So Senator Knesh and Representative Bonner did almost the same language, just put in gender instead of sex. And this was originally the bill that Senator Kinesh, when she was Representative Kinesh, introduced into the Minnesota House that passed out of the Minnesota House in 2019. And we'll talk more about that later. But again, she wanted to modernize and update the language and make it more inclusive. And so she is continuing to carry that bill with Kristen Bonner. And so those are basically, you know, very similar. We have seen and spoken with constitutional law attorneys about the use of the language sex and gender, and have been guaranteed that in the courts, while the words themselves are not synonymous in the English language, in courts, they are handled synonymously, that they tend to be used to define each other. And so we have been guaranteed that for all of our communities, they would receive the same protections, whether it goes through as sex or it goes through as gender. The third bill is the resolution to Congress. Senator McEwen out of Duluth took on this bill. And this is our resolution to the US Congress to remove that deadline. And we've had this bill as well as a Minnesota state constitution bill in the Minnesota legislature for years now. Again, both of these, the state amendment and the resolution to Congress, got voted and approved off the Minnesota House floor in 2019. They did not move. They didn't even get a hearing in committee in the Senate. So now here we are in 2021. We had to start with all new bill numbers. So same languages, same bills in essence, whole bunch of new authors, lots of support in the Senate, really trying to get a committee hearing in the Senate, because that's where we know we have a lot of support in the House, but we got to get these hearings in both. So those are the bills, and we'll be sending lots of information as well as a copy of this presentation later this week. And so I'm going to go ahead and see if anyone has any quick questions before I turn it over to Haley. I'm going to open up the chat. Hi, Pam from Minneapolis. You show up as Tom. That's fine. Joan from Egan. Did anyone have any questions quick? And again, you know, you can go ahead and wait. A bunch of your questions might be covered as we go further. But at any point, feel free to put them in the chat. And Haley, are you ready for me to hand over to you?
Yep. And we'll also just take a few minutes. You should have gotten like an info sheet, like PDF doc through email. So it takes a moment to make sure that's accessible to you. During this section, we're really going to be emailing and calling and making those actual contacts right here on the call to set up a meeting with your legislator. And feel free to put in the chat if you've ever had a meeting with your legislator, what your relationship is with your legislator. We know that we have a lot of different experience levels joining us on these lobby days. So feel free to put that in the chat. And let me know if you have questions accessing that, or if you didn't get that document. There were a couple of people who registered like this morning that I just sent you your legislators page, like by email, and then you should have gotten just a general document as well. So on finding legislators info, so if you, and I'll do kind of like a visual demonstration of this as well, but if you click on your legislator name on your document, that will be linked to their Minnesota House or Minnesota Senate page. On that Minnesota House or Senate page, you'll see that they have an email address, or sometimes it's a mail form in the Senate. Mail forms are not the greatest. They tend to have less of a response rate, but you can also try to send an email with the format of send.firstname.lastname@senate.mn. So you're just really plugging in the senator's first name and their last name into that format. It's possible it will bounce back and it won't work. And if so, that's okay to use the form. But I would try to do that email format, that email address format first. So we'll do a little bit of a visual. So this is just a random sheet. So if you click on the legislator's name, when this loads, you'll see that it's linked to their House page, same on the Senator. And that will lead you to this page. You can see in the House, they have the email right here. In the Senate, if they have a mail form, it's taking some time to load. If they have a mail form, it'll just say use mail form in their email address, and that'll have a link. Other things to pay attention to while you're on this page, and these are noted in the info sheet, so don't feel like you have to remember like all these different things to look for. But their legislative assistant, right now that is important because we're gonna be sending emails and they will be included on that. So just really their name is the most important thing to note. Committee assignments. So the first committee that the ERA has to go to in the House is Judiciary. In the Senate, it's Civil Law. So note if they sit on those committees or if they have leadership in those committees, it might help. They might be more help to get a hearing in those committees. Other things to note, what bills they chief and co-authored. So are they already a co-author on an ERA bill or a chief author? And finally, if they have any leadership. So are they a majority leader or minority leader? Are they chair or vice chair of one of those committees that the ERA will go to first? Are they majority whip? Anything like that. Where they have leadership, they also might have more weight and more influence in getting a committee hearing. Chat. Okay. So you're sending 2 emails, or if you prefer to call, you're making 2 calls total. So one for your representative and one for your senator. You want to send an email to both the legislator and their legislative assistant. If you call, you're just going to call the number associated with their legislative assistant. And the reason for that is that their legislative assistant manages their schedule, sets up all their meetings. So it's just good practice to include them on the initial email. If you don't, or if you can't find any LA information, then it's not the end of the world. They will likely just direct you to their LA in their response email, but it's just good to include them if possible. So the email format, and for whatever reason, these aren't included on the Minnesota Senate and Minnesota House websites anymore, but it's just their first name dot last name at house.mn, or if they're in the Senate, first name dot last name at senate.mn. And that format is also on your info sheet for reference, but again, really you're just plugging in the legislative assistant's first name and their last name. Be sure to include your address. I usually will include this in my signature, but you can really include it anywhere in the email. It's just a good way for them to know that you are a constituent. They'll usually ask for your address. So it's best to just include that in the initial email, and that will also help your email get prioritized since you are a constituent. And finally, there is a quick kind of change to this bullet point, but we are asking everybody to CC info@eramn.org on your email. The reason for that is that we have a lot of people attending these lobby days on different days that may be in the same district. So there might be someone in your district who attended another day and sent their email. So if anyone gets a meeting, we want to make sure that we can have as many people on that as possible, since we're all working towards the same thing. And then if you want to request that an ERA Minnesota member come to your meeting, or if you need technical assistance or need help making a Zoom link, you can also just directly email info@eramn.org. All right, so we'll pause here to take some time to just send an email to your legislator. Since we are in a daytime session, if you prefer to call, you can do that now as well. and just take some time to think about what you want to say. Also, the last thing I'll point out is that there is kind of like a very basic sample email that can be adapted to a call script on here. So just introduce yourself, say you're a constituent. You can talk about like if you work with any group, so like other women groups or even like church groups, anywhere, like anywhere that you're a leader. Note that you want to set up a meeting to discuss the ERA. And I would also suggest including that, like, why you're passionate about the ERA. Why are you spending the time to do this? How are you impacted by it? Anything like that you can include, and just give a brief description of like why you care about this. Please let me know when you're available to meet. I look forward to hearing from you, and then signing your name, again, your address, though you can also include that in the body of the email, by where you say you're a constituent, and also your email for them to contact you, or if you can't get a hold of someone on the phones, making sure you leave a phone number for them to call you back. So all of that said, we will take some time now to send your emails, or make your calls, and then also we'll stop for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat.
So yep, this will be what, Haley, do you think about 10 minutes we give folks? 5 minutes?
Yep, we'll give you like at least 10 minutes. And again, we'll take time, have plenty of time for questions. So if you have questions about this or about the rest of the presentation, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat.
And then we will continue to discuss a little bit more even after this, but go ahead and use this time to make those calls, view those emails, and we are more than happy to help in any way we can. And again, like Haley said, any questions you have, feel free to ask now, or you can wait until the end as well.
This is Joan, and I have a question.
Hi, Joan. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah. How are you? What's up?
Hi. How if you're supporting both bills, how do we phrase that in our contact with our legislators? I guess I'm puzzled as to if we're both supporting the Pappas bill and what's his name? What's his name? Anyway, the other bill.
So either Sinesh,
How do we,
or Dibble's bill.
how do we do our ask?
So you can be as open to say that you ask them to support any ERA bills being heard in committee. And you can say, you know, that there are multiple bills and you're happy to send them those bill numbers, or you can give them all the bill numbers. And Haley's pulling up a slide here where one of the asks is you can ask them to sign on as a co-author to any of those bills that still have slots available.
Okay, any ERA bill. Okay.
Yes. Yep. Any of them. We want any of them to get through.
Okay.
Yep. So we had this question.
Okay. So the Minnesota
too.
ERA.
Oh. Just gonna say we had this question yesterday too. And you can just, one way to do that is just say these are the bills that are introduced this session. We want a hearing in this committee on really any of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Heather, I'll pass this to you, but since many Republicans shut down conversation on the ERA, saying they're certain it will expand abortion rights and don't believe Roe v. Wade prevents more abortion rights with the ERA, so they absolutely can't support it. What would you like us to best to say or to like illustrate to best to address those concerns?
Yep, this is a big one that always comes up. And again, they will always go to the abortion conversation. And abortion and the ERA are litigated in two very different parts of the law. So they don't correspond with each other in the first place. And when they start to talk about the ERA providing more abortion rights, I think sometimes they refer to some, discussion around state ERAs that made it possible for state-funded abortions. And so when you talk about state ERAs, there are 26 states that have state ERAs in their state constitutions. And none of them have statistically higher abortion rates, and none of them have any impact on abortion rights overall from having an ERA. And so again, with Minnesota, state-funded abortion was settled in 1993 with the Doe versus Gomez case. And so that's already been handled here in Minnesota. So again, getting an ERA into our state constitution would not change the abortion situation here in Minnesota as it stands. And again, I'm reading your question here. I believe Roe v. Wade prevents more with the ERA. Again, they're handled in very different areas of the law. So abortion is handled under privacy, and equal rights amendment litigation would be handled under anti-discrimination. And so, the way that I've always kind of thought of it as, until men and women can both require abortion as medical care, that's when it would become a discrimination, so it's one of those tricky things. And so it's an area of law that, again, to this day, in any state that has a state ERA, there has been no findings that there are higher rates of abortion or looser pro-abortion or anti-abortion coverage. In fact, many states that have state ERAs actually have some of the tighter abortion control measures, which for many of us, that's a whole different conversation. But so that's something I would come back to our Minnesota state legislators about, is that when it comes to abortion here in Minnesota state, that's already been covered, for one thing, back in 1993. For another thing, state ERAs do not guarantee more open access to abortion. And really, again, nationally, it would reflect the same way. So, 1993 is the Doe versus Gomez. Minnesota, there's a state case about getting state funded under Medicare. I get Medicare and Medicaid for abortion coverage. So you can look up, I can put in, and try to find a link. So one of the best things to do, I think, to hear how these conversations happen, and we have a link on the website, and we can send a follow-up link, is to look at the YouTube video from the 2019 Minnesota House floor vote on the ERA bill that passed off the House floor. Because that's where you hear every argument come up, both pro and con, and you hear them discuss it in depth. And so some of the best insight into those anti-arguments are seen there. And the abortion one's always a big one. But again, it is not something that can be, it was connected to the ERA as a scare measure, as a scare tactic, and as bad messaging and a myth. And it's one that it's so quick and easy for them to grab onto because they know it's effective. But really, when it comes down into substance and litigation and how cases are tried in court, the two do not go hand in hand.
Okay. Another question or a response I have heard is that all of this is already covered in other bills. How do you respond to that?
In other bills or in other acts? Like acts that have been passed and already put into law, or that are being...
Right.
And so my quick immediate response is, if those acts and if that coverage really truly held up, and if this wasn't needed, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be talking about why we need it. We wouldn't see the massive inequities in pay gap, in pregnancy discrimination, in paternity right discrimination, in Social Security discrimination, for the pay gap in Social Security benefits after retirement, in insurance premiums being higher for women statistically, After COVID, women statistically getting hit far harder by the economic impacts of the pandemic. If those acts had previously been put in, we would not see the continued systemic issues that we see to this day on domestic violence against women statistically, especially for the communities of color and our Indigenous communities, and extending to our trans communities and men as well. And so that's my quick answer, is if any of those actually did the job that we think that they did, we wouldn't be where we are. And there are so many reports published every year that highlight the fact that these massive inequities are still raging. And one of my favorite quotes is, you know, if the 14th covered everything that it did, we wouldn't have needed the 19th, you know, and if the, you know, the byproducts of those acts, you know, actually covered what they're supposed to cover. And here we are still to this day, seeing the numbers and seeing the results of the fact that systemically, until all bodies are treated the same under the law and receive that same fair process under the law, there is not equality. And that's what it comes down to, is how these cases are looked at, viewed, and tried in the courts.
Eric Schmidt.
I have to, sorry,
No, that's okay.
I have to,
Poor Joan. Everything's yelling at her. Did anyone else have any other questions?
No, thank you for those answers. I think I'll
We lost you.
you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay.
You cut out a little bit.
I got a little bit closer. Thank you for that information. I think I'll look at the website too and see if there are any handouts. And I will request that one of the staff join me in the meeting, because I know Senate President Miller and Rep. Davids are very argumentative on this topic. And rather than go it alone, power in numbers. So I will ask for a partner in the meeting.
And we would be more than happy to do that, because yes, you are correct that they're slightly more difficult to have a real conversation with. And yes, our website, the resources page, we have all of the copies of any of the handouts we used to have physically. So the brochures, there's a 10 ways brochure that highlights the national, like 10 reasons why nationally we really still need the ERA. And each one of those holds up just as strongly here in Minnesota State. There's FAQ sheets, and I just got some updated talking point sheets that we'll be putting up there here in the next couple of days as well. So
great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just give you a couple more quick minutes to finish up if any of you are making those calls or sending those emails. And if you wanted to wait until the end, like I said, we've got another segment of the workshop that we're going to be doing here in just a second. So I'll give you about 2 more minutes. All right. All right, so I'm not gonna be able to see the chat super easily here for the next couple minutes, but don't stop putting those questions in there and we'll come back to it again in the next Q&A section. But what we're gonna talk about next is, okay, so you've scheduled your meeting, you've heard back, now what? So when you're actually having that meeting with your representative or your senator, how do you best talk to them? Oops, sorry, excuse me, I didn't know that was gonna do that. So we talk about the Lobbying 101 training and important points. So our legislators work for us. Their job is to represent us and listen to our concerns. I'm sorry, I'm hearing my son I'm so sorry. There might be a slight emergency. Bear with me one moment. All right, he's not bleeding. We're good. So set the bar real high. Again, these folks, the bulk of their job, beyond having to sit in committees and hear bills and author bills and pass legislation, is to represent their whole district, not just the folks who voted for them, but their whole district. And so we want to make sure that they're making time to hear from their constituents. And so hopefully they responded yes, that they're going to meet with you. And so now that you're getting a few minutes of Zoom time with them, and if they haven't offered out to set up a Zoom meeting, we are happy to use our service for you. You just let us know. So if they haven't said yes, you know, if they say yes, we want to meet with you, and they kind of leave it hanging, we are happy to help you facilitate that. So when you go and you speak with them, you know, we always talk about sharing their personal story, talking about why the ERA is important to you. Why do you care about it? There's no right or wrong reason. You know, there's no perfect script. There's nothing you have to memorize. You just talk about what this means to you. Why is equality under the law important in your world? And it can be any story, anything you're comfortable sharing with them, but they want to know why this matters. And even if your legislator is pro-ERA, they need to know we have their backs and that we support them being supportive. We don't want them to feel like they're doing this on their own, because they may then decide that, oh, if they're not hearing from people that they still care about it, they might stop carrying it. And so they need to hear how much we appreciate their support, what can they do to help us, and how can we help them? You know, we can ask them if they are supported. We can say, so, you know, what can we be doing out here to help support them and to help spread this very important word? And again, it's about accountability. We want to make sure they know that we're paying attention, you know, and that can go from researching your legislator and finding out what other bills are they authoring or co-authoring, what pieces of legislation, even if you don't support your legislator, finding out what they're doing and finding out what committees they sit on, maybe watching some of those virtually or on TV and seeing how they engage in committee, and finding those common grounds. There's got to be something somewhere, even if you totally disagree with them, there might be something somewhere that you can say, hey, I saw your work on this. I thought that was really powerful. I'd love to talk to you about things that are very powerful and meaningful to me as well. And letting them know that you're kind of watching them. Sometimes we call it stalking, but it's not. It's really just keeping them accountable and letting them know that they're not just flying under the radar, getting to sort of just do all this in a closed box. They are being held accountable by the folks who put them in the seat that they're in. And even if you didn't vote for them, you are paying their salary. You, being a Minnesotan, are carrying out and having to live under the laws that they are there creating. So it all comes down to making sure they know that they're not just getting away with anything that they want. So when you go in there, you're going to introduce yourself, say who you are, why you're there, why the ERA is important, and what your ask is. Like Joan was asking earlier, what is the ask? Because they'll say kind of, what do you want from me? How can I help, or what can I do? What we really want is we want any ERA bill, any of those bills, heard in committee, both in the Senate and the House. And would they consider signing on as an author, a co-author or an author? They can make another clone bill if they wanted to get even more support. And then to really speak with their colleagues about supporting and talking to leadership. And leadership extends far beyond their own constituency. When you're in leadership, you are now responsible for the whole state. You go above and beyond just your constituents. So we absolutely encourage folks reaching out to members of committee leadership and the House and Senate leadership overall and say, these bills are important. We need to hear these bills in committee and on the floor. And especially with the Minnesota amendment bills, it's about Minnesotans having the opportunity to make a decision about this. So until those bills are voted out of the House and Senate, Minnesotans don't have a chance to even say yes or no, they want this in their constitution. It's not up to leadership to decide, it's up to Minnesotans to decide if they want this to be a part of their constitution. But when you don't get to hear these bills in committee, leadership is actively taking away that opportunity from Minnesotans. And so that's an important piece to talk about as well. And then you always want to thank them, even if you have a super frustrating conversation. And genuinely, I spend a lot of time having these one-on-one conversations with pro and anti-ERA legislators. And a lot of the antis aren't really going to get super upset or angry. They're not going to be attacking. They will usually come across very kind and say, oh, of course I support equality. And you say, well, okay, what version of equality do you support? You know, let's talk more about what that looks like. So genuinely, they will usually be very polite. And we want to always be respectful. We want to always leave them feeling that the ERA was that slightly higher ground, better person. So thank them and follow up and say, you know, thank you so much for making this time. I'd love to loop back with you maybe in the future. Or again, I'm going to be watching your committee hearings. So I'm going to be supporting you from the sidelines. You're not alone in this. All of that is really important for them to hear. So if you look at the second page of your form, you'll see protocol for legislators with different opinions on the ERA, talking points and info on the bills. And I think Haley sent this to me. You should have it in front of you. Let me see if, bear with me one moment as I am still learning Zoom and all of its fun. Let's see if I can find a copy of that sheet. So I know I have it. So bear with me. Okay, apparently that has disappeared from my files. So, Eric, Haley just sent it to me. Spare with me 1 second. But where did it go? Oh my goodness. Okay, so that's not between the Zoom call and my, oh, I see my first part, bill helps advance. Oh, there we are, the talking points. Thank you. So yes, the talking points. Equal pay, the pay gap, that's always one of the biggest ones. And it's kind of frustrating to know that really the only time people will listen is if it comes down to money. But it's sad and true. As we saw demonstrated by Ramsey County Commissioner Tristan Matica-Steele, who was one of our top ERA Minnesota folks, and who went on to become a county commissioner here in Ramsey County. When she first got in, one of her first things is she wanted to have Ramsey County pass a resolution of support for the ERA. And of course, she was immediately denied and poo-pooed by many of the GOP county commissioners. And again, county commissioners are supposed to be non-party line, but that was, and again, the ERA is supposed to be non-party line. It's a non-partisan issue. But we get a lot of pushback currently from a lot of the GOP folks, sadly, even though originally the ERA was Republican legislation. Besides the point, she takes this to the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners. They say no. She and some of the other commissioners start putting together numbers to just see what it could look like fiscally and present it in that way. And so they did. And I wish I had the numbers in front of me, so don't quote me on the numbers, but I believe it was something like either $4 or $6 million a year would be saved in Ramsey County alone if we could close that pay gap for women. I think they averaged it out because, you know, for white women, it's roughly 80 cents on the dollar, going down all the way to 50 cents for Latino women and Indigenous women. So I think they found the rough average in between those two and used that as their starting point. If the pay gap were closed here in Ramsey County for women who had to apply to the WIC program, it was either 4 or 6, one of those, but still millions of dollars annually would have been saved in that program alone, just the WIC program. Never mind any of the others, never mind any of the other counties in Minnesota. As soon as they presented that, all of the naysayers immediately turned around and said, oh, okay. And the resolution was passed. And so we now have Ramsey County supporting the ERA. So it's an argument that works, and it's a very important one. It is one of the most important ones because as soon as you can close that pay gap, you close the opportunity gap, you close the healthcare, the homelessness, the retirement gap. So many other factors fall in line, not just when it comes to discrimination against women, but when it comes to racism, when it comes to discrimination against the disabled community. As soon as you can pay people what they deserve to be paid, a lot of other very big pieces of life fall into place. Pay gap matters. We always put as many of the updated findings as we can on our website. So if you need to find any current, especially with COVID right now, We just put up a couple links on there in our resources page that from studies that came out this year about if the pay gap were closed nationally, the trillions of dollars that would be put back into the economy. Oh, okay, Joan, thank you. We'll be sending the follow-up, so be on the lookout for another email with this presentation. Thank you for being with us. So yes, pay gap is a big one. And then we talk about, equality in education. Same thing. So all of these different gaps that happen with access and opportunity to equal education opportunities, especially when it comes to scholarships and funding. Statistically, women have not been granted the same level of scholarships to educational branches, to private schools, and when we look at sports teams, etc. There's always been that gap there. Frontline workers during COVID, statistically, women make up not only our care teams, but the at-home care teams. And so many women have been forced to have to no longer work because they maybe make less. And so it works out in the family that they're the ones who have to stay home to do the homeschooling, to do all the caretaking at home, to care for elders, to care for family members. And so now coming out of COVID, they'll be at a much bigger disadvantage, and many of them will not be getting the same stimulus packages coming out of it as well. And again, that all adds up when we look at, the money that's going into your Social Security and into retirement. It all adds up. Rosie Rocco used to talk about the number of, if the pay gap were closed, what she herself, she added up the amount of if she had been paid equally to her male counterparts for the duration of her career, how much more money, and I want to say it was like $300,000 or something like that she would have had in her retirement just for her. So discrimination in the workplace, especially around this pregnancy discrimination is a big one. And also that starting wage situation that we're still battling, that, again, there have been acts to try to make that fair and equal pay. It still happens. It's still a practice. And again, because these acts that are introduced do not have a firm foothold in the very body that all of our laws come from, they don't hold up and they don't have power. They don't have teeth. And so we are still faced with women not getting paid the same starting salaries. We have students coming out with the same student loans and not getting that same starting salary. So now that loan gap is much broader as well. And then, like I've said, senior women with retirement Social Security and those higher insurance premiums and coverage and access. And so all of these are talking points. And then there are so many more, and everyone has their own personal story. Every single woman, and again, the ERA is for all, but women make up half the population, have had a moment in their life that they can come back to and say, I was treated differently purely because I am a woman, or purely because I identify as a woman. So it says, when we have equality that benefits everyone in society, and this is so true, it is truly a human rights issue. This is about people being treated as people and given the respect that they are due. So why is the ERA important to you? And your story about why you're taking the time to meet with your legislators is really the most important piece. And thank you so much, Jeanette, for putting these in the chat. I really appreciate that. Go team, thank you. So yeah, it is, again, when we look at talking points, and like I said, we have a whole new raft of them that we'll be putting up on the, just updated over the last couple of years, and especially this last year that we'll be putting up on the website. But you can't, it's hard for a legislator to argue against your personal story. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the biggest piece, is that they're going to have their pitch, and especially the ones who don't support are going to try to hurry you out. They're going to try to just say, well, of course I support this. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, see you later. We don't want to be brushed off. And so let me share my screen again really quick. And again, talking points, yeah, having it accessible with you when you're, in your meeting. And right now, all the meetings will be virtual. All the meetings will be over Zoom. And many legislators again, this is a part of their job. So your legislator really should have regular time set aside to meet with constituents, whether they're doing, you know, monthly coffee Zoom meetings or if they're doing town halls. And if you are unfortunate that you have a legislator who is not sending e-newsletters or, you know, communicating with their district in any way, that needs to be brought to attention. And, you know, we can always start off very politely asking for time. And if they're still not giving you time and they're still not meeting with their constituents, that's where I start to say, we talk to people about that. We call that out. We say, hey, so-and-so, you know, I've asked for meetings so many times with this legislator. They don't do town halls. They're not meeting with their district. That's not okay. You know, especially right now when our state and our country have so many things happening that require, you know, critical attention. Now is not the time to hide. So that's important too, to call out whether you're on social media, and we don't have to be mean. We don't have to pull out their personal values and attack them as, you know, but really to just come from that point of they're not making themselves accessible, but hopefully yours will. So did anyone have any questions at this point?
I would add, I think there's one in the chat too, but I was just going to add that recently I heard that a lot of conservatives think in more terms of security and emotion, and a lot of us Democrats and liberals like facts and statistics. So you kind of have to gauge if, and stories do have such importance. If we have a talking point like equal pay, maybe talk how you would have spent more money in your own life. And that really triggers the memory. I worked on the ERA in Nevada, and then Illinois passed it in Virginia, but we submitted a lot of these fact sheets in our exhibits, and then tried to talk a lot with legislators on a personal basis. And while we didn't get a lot of Republicans on our side, we did get some of the women. And in Nevada, in Illinois, we had a strong Republican legislator who was a lawyer and understood the abortion rights laws difference that Heather mentioned. So he really helped to drill those points down. But I do want to point out the stories matter so much for people's memories. Like, oh yeah, Jeanette studied, like one I'm going to use real quick is I studied political science and international human rights. And as long ago as 1948 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Eleanor Roosevelt helped draft, we said we supported equal rights in every country. And we reiterated that in another international covenant on civil and political rights. And then the third one in 2015, we helped adopt the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with Goal 5 for gender equality. So what I point out is, you know, I studied all these human rights in my life and all these wonderful global goals, what the US supports, but it's really hypocrisy if we say we're going to agree to these things, and then I walk around my own country knowing I'm a second-class citizen and the US is supposed to be a leader. So that just gives it a little bit, even though I'm sharing facts, I'm bringing it home how I think about it every day, how it bothers me that I'm not equal. So I would just add that a story came out about the Venezuelan woman who was having her 9th child. It was a major news story because she couldn't access birth control at all. And she was trying to feed her kids with an eggplant and an egg. So again, that story does so much more for the birth control issue in South America than maybe so many other statistics could. So I really encourage people to, again, tie any talking point to their own life.
Thank you so much. And yes to all of that. And the other piece too about the international part is CEDAW. So our very own, and first of all, thank you so much for your work on Nevada and Illinois, by the way. That is, yes, thank you. Between Nevada and Illinois and Virginia, you know, we are so much closer than we've ever been nationally with the ERA. We've got all 38. We are technically, we have the 28th Amendment. It just has not been acknowledged properly, but we'll get into more of that in a bit. But truly, the ERA has become the 28th Amendment by passing all 38 states for ratification.
Yes, I was there in Virginia the day it passed as the final step. And that act was the 38th state. Now, Trump did direct the archivist not to publish that fact, which was a partisan maneuver, and he really didn't have, the archivist didn't have the rights. So you're right, we're waiting for either Biden to pressure the archivist to publish it, but Biden may be waiting for both the House and the Senate to eliminate the deadline first. We're not sure what strategy they're using. They're gauging the politics and the optics of it all. So we're pressuring the archivist to publish, and there's legal cases. Virginia, Illinois, and Nevada are working on it. But then we're also supporting the House measures. So I'm someone that says support all avenues, because when injustice exists, we have the right to fix these laws that are so unethical and egregious. And like you said, Heather, the 14th Amendment, in my opinion, equal protection of the laws, should already be protecting us. But if we have judges in the Supreme Court that aren't going to interpret it that way, then we have to add the amendment to make it crystal clear so their arguments cannot stand even when they try to muddy the waters.
Exactly. And absolutely. And that's what that resolution, the Congress piece coming out of the Minnesota legislature, if anyone's curious, that mirrors exactly that work that is happening nationally about removing that deadline, saying that it's been done before with the 27th Amendment regarding increase to congressional pay that took over 200 years. It was still waived. The deadline was waived. It was allowed to go through. So we've seen that, in fact, deadlines are not, especially when it's in the preamble, not in the body of the amendment itself, that it is not a thing that holds firm, that it can, you know, we can have that removed. And again, all these different avenues, any support, like Jeanette said, any support on any measure. So the Minnesota resolution to Congress is again about removing that artificial timeline. And again, getting an ERA into our state constitution to help us at our state level is equally important to having it nationally as well. And talking about CEDAW, the Convention for the Elimination Against Discrimination, for Discrimination Against Women, we had our own Corinne Horrible, who is out of the Iron Range here in Minnesota. She was drafted by the Carter administration to go and be a member of the body of folks writing CEDAW. So she contributed to the authorship of the CEDAW Treaty. Now, the U.S. cannot be a part of CEDAW. Why? Because we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment in our Constitution. We have nothing in our written Constitution that guarantees equal rights to all members of the country. So the U.S. and 6 other countries, like I believe Tonga, Palau, I can't remember all the others, are not a member of CEDAW. It's very discouraging. Like Jeanette said, we can't be a true leader for democracy and human rights issues, that we try to go around the world and fix everyone else when we have huge problems right here, as we all know. And so one of the questions as well is, do you recommend asking legislators for a Zoom meeting with other ERA supporters? And that's why we are asking folks to CC info@ERA.mn, because we have, you know, our record of all the folks who did the workshop training. And so we can, if someone gets a meeting, we can find who else is in that district, ask if they'd like to be a part of this meeting that's being set up, and help coordinate. So everyone, because absolutely power in numbers, 100%. And so if we start to see You know, another thing we used to do is we'd send email blasts saying, hey, if anyone has a meeting with their legislator, please let us know. We'll probably continue to do that. But this seemed to be more effective, having the folks who came to the workshops and connecting them and having that as a starting point. And so absolutely, yes, and we will help facilitate that. And we are happy to go be a part of any of those meetings if you would like us there. And another piece, again, as well, is that we'll start publishing more about is sitting in those committee meetings. So civil law in the Senate is the committee under which our ERA bills would be heard, and then judiciary and public safety in the House. And so we have on our website, we'll be sending out emails about, with the links to those live streaming committee hearings. And so it's not the same as we used to do, where we'd say our committee sit-ins, where we'd have folks go sit in those committees in their green ERA shirts and do what I called lurking. I'd say, let's go lurk at the Capitol and just sit there and make sure they see that we're there and we're watching the committees that are supposed to be hearing these bills. And you can go and be a public testifier. You can go up and talk about other bills. And so the more they see your face and they see you engaging in the process, the more support they'll feel they have. And if they're not supportive, they might start to feel like maybe they should do something about this. And maybe they don't, but it's still good to get in front of them. It's still good for them to see that we are there. That's hard to do when we're live streaming this. So how do we do that while we're live streaming? And what I really recommend for folks to do, and I know that everyone's schedules are crazy, but if you can, and like I said, we'll be publicizing the committees, the days, the times, and the links to go to their live streams for these two committees in particular. While you're watching the live stream, if you're on social media, go onto your social media and say, hashtag whichever senator or representative that you're watching, great job on this bill, or I have a question about this, or hey, you just made a great point, and just start engaging with them in that way. Or you can share to your friends, hey, I was watching this committee hearing and I can't believe that this bill is still here. And just try to be creative and engage however you can, or email or phone call your legislator if they're in that committee, or any of the leadership of that committee, and say, I was watching this committee hearing. I really want to see the ERA bills heard in this committee. My friends and I, we're all watching the committee hearings and we're just waiting. And we want to know when we're going to have a hearing for the ERA. So any of those, all of that helps immensely. And again, nationally, you know, we are so close. And yet, like Jeanette said, you know, we are just sort of waiting for any one of these different angles to go through, whether it's all the lawsuits happening with the attorney generals at the state level, whether it's getting it heard out of the Senate and the House, whether the Biden administration can urge the archivist to ignore the previous opinion of the previous administration. Any and all of these, we're just hoping. And we know that there's, you know, there are acts that are going through, there are pieces of legislation that sound great and sound very encouraging. But again, until you have very specific language embedded into the actual Constitution as an amendment, laws can be overturned, they can be misruled, the acts can be overturned. There just aren't the teeth, they're not getting that same respect and due process as they would if they were actually embedded into the Constitution. So having equality acts, having all these other pieces of legislation are band-aids on hemorrhaging wounds. We need an actual language against gender and sex discrimination embedded into our national and state constitutions for the laws to actually do the job they need to do to protect each and every one of us. And that's what it comes down to. And as much myths and bad messaging as there is around the ERA, that's what it comes down to, very simply. And so just letting our legislators and our friends and doing that education and the outreach about why it's still important and why these acts and the other pieces of legislation are great, yes, but they aren't going to fix the problem. They haven't fixed the problem in the past. The only way to fix the problem is to actually get these into the Constitution. And so again, you know, I can't thank you all enough for doing what you're doing, for being here, for at least starting. And many of you I know I've seen many times. And so I know you've been working on this, you know, even longer than I have. And I just appreciate that we're all in the fight still together. And we are here to support. We don't own the ERA. No one owns the ERA. This is about everyone, maybe not Mama Cow. I'm sorry, Mama Cow. I don't think it extends to you. But again, we want to support the work that everyone's doing. So any way we can do that, we're happy to do. The website, again, on the resources page has loads of information and links and testimonials from experts that we've had do testifying in the Senate and the House. We have our billboard campaign up that we're excited about. We want to extend that out. And then International Women's Day, we're going to be doing postcards. We urge folks to still send postcards. Yes, postcards are still important. One thing that I like to bring up, I think Haley may have mentioned it a little bit before, is that even if the LAs are the only ones who see that postcard, there have been times when we've actually been able to get our foot in the door of a meeting with a legislator because the LA felt that this was important and they got us on the schedule. And so it matters. And so we are still putting those postcards out to get that across those desks as best we can. And I know it's 5 after 12 and I want to respect everyone's time. Feel free to stay on if you have any more questions. We'll be sending this presentation out at the end of the week. But thank you so much all.